DevelopSec, Developing Security Awareness with James Jardine, brought to you by Jardine Software. Hi, welcome to episode 2 of the DevelopSec podcast. I'm your host, James Jardine, and today we're going to take a look at passwords. The whole topic today is going to be about passwords because it's constantly in the news, issues about user passwords or other types of passwords that are out there. For example, I saw in the news just this morning about Yahoo resetting a bunch of passwords because there was an apparent attack on a bunch of users trying to go in and get information from emails to steal other information. And the assumption is that maybe these username and passwords for these email accounts were maybe stolen from another location, maybe another company, where people maybe reused those accounts and brought that information over. On the same note, we're seeing Target now is starting to come out with more information to say that it was a set of vendor credentials that may have been breached, and that's how the attackers got into the Target systems. We see passwords everywhere. I don't know of anybody that doesn't know what a password is unless you're under a certain age, but if you're using the internet, if you're using a computer, most people have seen passwords. I mean, we use them all the time. We've got way too many of them, and it's very difficult to maintain these. But we really have to understand, what is a password? What makes it difficult for an attacker to get it or to try to attack it? And how we should really be managing these items. The whole reason we have to use these, there's really two big reasons. There's a client-side reason, it's my password, and really I'm using that password to say, hey, this is me, I want access to the system, and nobody else should have access because I'm the only one that should know the password. So I'm helping protect my data by blocking access to anybody else. From a company side or a business side, they actually rely on the passwords for kind of a different reason, although it's still to find out who you are, right? They want to make sure that they're not allowing somebody else to come in and access your data, but at the same time, they want to make sure that they can actually have accountability and repudiation for anything that you're doing within that account. If you log in and put your credentials in, then the initial assumption is, without a whole bunch of searching the background, well, that is James Jardine that just logged into the system. So every action I do, it appears as though that it's me doing it. So we can help track these things. So if people order stuff and then try to say they didn't, this helps as they start tracking down how things happen, right? They look up your IP address. They do all kinds of research to find out, did you do this or did you not do this? And looking at those logs, hey, this person logged in with these credentials from an IP address that they always log in from. It's hard to say, no, that wasn't me. So it can make it very difficult. A lot of people, though, don't really understand what makes a good password. And unfortunately, that's even the same with companies, consumers. It really doesn't matter. There's a big misunderstanding out there. A lot of times we see password requirements of 6 to 8 characters or 6 to 12 characters, a minimum of 8, and it's got to have complexity of a special character, an uppercase, a lowercase, a number, and a hair from your dog's tail. But those aren't the types of things that are really making it that much more complex with the way that attackers are starting to attack passwords. Because we don't go down, as an attacker perspective, very rarely am I walking up to your desk, doing research, looking around like you see on TV and saying, oh, I see a picture of his dog, and his dog's name is Rufus. Let me try Rufus. And I'm in. I used Rufus, but I replaced the F with an L or an F with a 1 to make it so you wouldn't figure it out. This is rarely the case. Usually passwords are targeted from a large mass standpoint through automated tools. I'm not going to sit there and try to guess a whole bunch of passwords. I may try 1 or 2 if I'm targeting a specific person, but in most cases, it's an automated tool that's trying to crack passwords. And we're doing this based off of 2 things. One is some sort of dictionary list whether it's a word list, whether it's a list from previous breaches. Yahoo was breached at one point. LinkedIn. There's a whole bunch of sites that have been breached regarding email accounts or usernames and passwords. One site you can actually go to see that is haveibeenpwned.com. And it's HAVEIBENPWNED.com. And you basically go in, put your email address in, and it'll let you know if your email address shows up on any of 9 at the current moment breaches that have happened that have a whole bunch of stuff. So they've got Yahoo accounts, Vodafone accounts, Sony accounts. It's a whole list of accounts out here where you can go say, hey, was my email breached on this? It's also got Adobe. One of the things you can do is go out there and find out, hey, has my username shown up on any of these lists? Oh, my username showed up on Adobe? What was my password that I used there? Oh, I used that same password on Facebook? Well, I better go change my Facebook password because we're going to assume that password actually got cracked at some point. So we look at these different links that we see and these restrictions that we see. We always recommend, using a passphrase. Do 15 characters. That's much harder to defeat in most cases unless you're using something very similar and very common. It's much easier to defeat than a smaller bit because just the sheer number of CPU cycles it's going to take to run through all the possible character combinations of the 15 characters put together versus 8 characters, right? CPUs are getting faster. They're getting way better at, being able to have high performance systems trying to run millions of calculations a second. So the longer we can make it, it exponentially increases the difficulty for them to run through those. So that's one thing that we want to think about when we're thinking about making this. It's not an issue of, hey, this is some random little word that only I know and nobody else will figure this out, right? Because they don't know it. That's not the case. Because you could have, my random favorite number is 34. So I'll use 34 in my thing, right? And that's not something because as they loop through these lists, they're going to come across that. So we talked about using these dictionaries or these other lists. The other way to do it is to just pure fuzz the account, where you're basically just throwing up every possible combination of letters within that character space for those different lengths until you find it. Now, hopefully, at least from a login screen or something like that, the systems that you're using have some sort of brute force protections to help limit this from I'm going to guess this at the login screen. The bigger issue we're starting to see is people starting to get full databases from some of these breaches, and then they take it offline, and then they have all kinds of time and no limits to try to crack these passwords. And the downside that we see is a lot of people use the same password across multiple sites. I've talked at many places, and I've had a lot of people ask, well, what if I just use the same password for banking across all my banking, and then I use a different password for all my social media sites? One, I guess, so, it's good at least that you're separating social from banking, but really you should be taking it a step forward, because even though you may think, well, it's just my Facebook account, I've got some pictures, some information, but it's not, it's all public. It's no big deal. That's not always the case. I mean, we can, from an attacker perspective, maybe I'm just trying to get revenge. And if I get into your Facebook account, I post, not very nice pictures, to put it nicely, right? That it makes it look like you did it. And, it can really tarnish your reputation. Now you got to try to say, no, I didn't do this. And you have to fight that back. So even though it's a social media site that you don't really put a whole lot of stake in, there still is concern, and you want to help separate that out. Now, fortunately, we are seeing a lot of sites start bringing on the ability for single sign-on solutions. How many sites do you go to that allow you to sign in with your Facebook account? I won't get into the details of my opinions on signing into every site with Facebook, but you're starting to see this more and more where oh, you can use your Twitter account to sign in or your Facebook account to sign in or this other account. So that way you've got one username and password to get you into all these different sites. Of course, the downside to that is somebody gets that one password, now they're getting into all these different sites. So you have to be very vigilant about watching your accounts. But that could be an issue. Another thing that we see, right, is having some sort of multi-factor authentication. I personally love the Google Authenticator app. I use it all the time. Any site that allows me to use it, I use it. The purpose to multi-factor authentication is you've got some other mechanism there besides just your password that's going to allow you to log into the website. So I put in my username and password, click log in. It says, oh, you require multi-factor, and I know that, yes, the password's right, but now supply me this other token. And whether that's coming from your phone, whether you're getting a text message from a company, right? My bank doesn't do it via the phone, but it will send an email with the secret code that I have to then type in. So not only would I have to get the password, but I get to get this other code that's not stored anywhere at any time. So now we're making it much more difficult for somebody to actually access our account, even if the password gets stolen. Now, if our password gets stolen, do we want to just leave it out there and say, well, I have two-factor, I don't care? You probably still want to change it, just so that way they don't have free reign to try to poke at the two-factor. You want to try to make sure it's something that nobody else knows. But a lot of these multi-factor solutions are out there. You've also got, mostly in businesses, you see the RSA token used as a multi-factor to get into your VPN clients. And there's multiple other options that you have available for being able to do multi-factor. Another thing, because we have so many sites that we have to store passwords for, how do you remember them all? I personally use a password manager. That way I don't have to remember them all. I use a password manager. I use passphrases where I can. Some companies, some sites you can't. That may be a back-end issue. It just may be a business policy issue. Some back-ends may not support 15 characters. But I try to use something unique, some sort of passphrase that's easy to type rather than trying to surf around for weird special characters. And then I put them all into my password manager. And I've, switched family members over to password managers. They couldn't get into anything if they lost their password manager, so I hope nobody loses it. But I also, use my password manager for storing secret questions, these security questions that we have, right? Because this is another area of passwords, that password reset side, that is a concern. Because oftentimes these secret questions aren't very difficult secret questions, especially with social media out here. What was your first car? What is this? And you go out to Facebook or, these other sites and you can see all this information. So those secret questions don't really help a lot in most cases. So I don't like to answer them correctly. So, I'll answer them with something different. What's my favorite car? And I'll have some weird, tree name or something else in there that has nothing to do with cars. So it hopefully will make it much more difficult for at least somebody trying to directly target me to attack those and make you actually try to get into like some sort of brute force scenario. And then trying to brute force maybe 3 questions all at the same time to get them all right at the same time is going to be very difficult. So the problem there is I lose my password manager. Whew, man, it's ugly. I don't know what I'm doing. I tried actually getting into a site, this was a few years ago, and sure enough, I couldn't remember my password. I go to log in, don't know my password. I go to do the secret questions, don't know the secret questions. So I call the number, and they ask me the secret questions. And I'm like, I don't know the secret questions. That's why I'm talking to you. Well, we can't let you in. The only thing we can do is we can mail you, snail mail style, a PIN number that you can plug in so that way you can log in. So here it was, a site that I wanted to get into that day. I didn't have the information. I had to wait like a week for this PIN number to show up. And quite honestly, I think I opened it and looked at the PIN number. I never logged in. It wasn't that important to me. I think it was like 3 years before I logged in again. Right, this is a big problem. And my problem at that point was I just didn't store that one in a password manager. I thought I'd be sneaky and store different answers or something. And yeah, I out-sneaked myself and I denial of service to myself. So we really need to start thinking about how we handle our passwords, the reason why we have a password, why we don't want to share our passwords, and how we can start protecting ourselves in the event that something happens. A site gets breached, our password gets breached. How can we handle that? How can we go through and know that, oh, okay, that password, I'm not using it anyplace else, but here's how I'm going to go about fixing it. And a lot of companies are getting better, right? They send out notices. They're doing automatic resets. In Yahoo, they automatically just reset everybody's password. So you have to, through some second channel, go in and reset your password if you're the owner of the account. Maybe that's sending an email to an alternate email address or an SMS message to a phone, something like that to try to prove you own it. They come up with lots of ways to help curb these issues, but it's always not enough, and it may not be quick enough that something may happen. So the better we can get at building up strong passwords and protecting them. I know passwords are horrible. I mean, it's not the best or even a good way to be keeping people out and using it for authentication. But unfortunately, that's what we have at the moment. Not everybody's going to have biometrics. Not everybody's going to have all these different ways. We're stuck with the password for now. So using the password, using multifactor if it has it, it's very easy to use. The Google Authenticator, I believe, goes on both Android and iPhone. I use it on my iPhone. And I literally store any site that I go to that'll support it. I have it in there. Just means I need my phone, but you can print off some kind of emergency pins, so that way, just in case you lose your phone. I actually lost my phone a few years ago, and my Gmail, fortunately, I had an alternate email address that it would send a code to. Every site I went to had some way that even though I lost my device, I was able to get into it. So we want to pick some way to be able to increase the security of our applications. We can't put everything on application owners. When it comes to the password side, we have to start protecting those values, rotating our passwords every once in a while. How often do you actually change passwords? I don't think I've ever changed my Facebook password, which is bad, right? I mean, here I'm not even practicing what I preach, but it's important that we start doing that so that way it does make it difficult. And we just start getting in the habit. Hey, every quarter or every few months, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change my password on this site, and just go in and change it once in a while. If you're using a manager, it's a lot easier to maintain. Just do your research when you're going to pick like a manager to use or something like that. So, I mean, that really is the big issues we're starting to see with passwords and, password management. And, we see this all the time. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough, that there's always issues going on with something with a password. Lately, it seems like usually it's password databases being breached, but we're seeing it all the time. So we need to start paying more attention to how we handle our passwords as developers. How do we store passwords and manage passwords, and just be a lot more vigilant with it. So that'll wrap up this episode 2 of the DevelopSec podcast. You can come out and see all the other podcasts out at developsec.libsyn.com, where all the episodes will be stored. And we will look forward to doing episode 3 next week. You have been listening to the DevelopSec podcast with James Jardine. Follow us on Twitter at DevelopSec and visit our website at www.developsec.com for more episodes and information.